Hello there, my name is Terry, and welcome to another episode of the Animation Industry Podcast. Today, I'm chatting with one of the creators of Dragonframe Software, Jamie Caliri. And if you're unfamiliar with what Dragonframe is, it is the foremost stop motion animation software on the market today. It's used by pretty much every stop motion studio in the world, and there's a good chance you've seen a feature film produced using it. For example, Kubo and the Two Strings, The Missing Link, I Love Dogs, Early Man, and Frankenweenie were all made using Dragonframe. So in this chat, Jamie's going to share the story of how Dragonframe came to be, as well as his personal journey into the animation industry. And if you're unfamiliar with Jamie's work, besides Dragonframe, he is a multiple award-winning director who's got an Emmy, a number of Annies, and a whole bunch of other awards for commercials and music videos that he's directed, all of which he's going to go into further detail in our chat. So let's jump right in. Hi, Jamie. Thanks so much for coming on the chat today. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me on the show. Been in lockdown. It's the coronavirus time, so been hanging out with family a lot.
Well, we are all doing that. everybody's in. It's an interesting time for sure right now. So I want to talk a lot about Dragonframe because you are one of the co-founders, and I think that's incredible. Dragonframe is an amazing tool that I personally love, and I know stop motion people all over the world use it. So I do want to chat about how that came to be and all that fancy stuff. But first, I want to know kind of your story of getting into this industry. So where did everything begin for you?
Well, where things began for me in terms of the animation industry would have to have been really starting at CalArts. I didn't really know there was a thing as the animation industry when I went to CalArts. I went there first for photography, and this was in the late 80s. But I'd always loved like theater and performance. I was always like a performing kid, and I loved storytelling, and I loved movies and filmmaking. And I had done some film work. Just on my 8mm camera and a little bit of stop motion, but I never was like let me build little characters kind of, animator. I did more, just moving stuff. And it was just kind of, an extra thing I did along with some other film stuff.
Wait. So you'd seen movies and cartoon shows and stuff. So you knew that there was an animation industry, I guess.
Right. But it hadn't occurred to me ever that I would be a part of the animation industry. That was my goal. I just like making imagery and I like entertaining people. Wasn't sure what I was going to do. I thought maybe I'd be a photographer. I got into CalArts in the photography program, but immediately, right when I got there, I took an animation course, and it was actually in the experimental animation department, where I immediately met a lot of really interesting, talented people there. What happened for me, I got really lucky, was that there was a contest for making MTV interstitials. I was just kind of walking around campus one day, and I saw one of my friends who was in the experimental animation class that I was taking, and he had this Bolex hooked up to a piece of wood with like a animation peg bar at the other end, and he was getting people to like hold it. And I couldn't tell what was going on, but he was running around campus shooting this crazy thing. I was, what are you doing? And he said, oh, don't you know there's an MTV contest and everybody's making these little MTV IDs. So I just thought, well, that sounds like fun. And even though I wasn't in the film program, I just sort of begged, borrowed, and stole equipment, got lights, and I got my roommate to work with me on it. His name was Barry Bond, and he was more of an artist than I was. So I was doing storyboards. And then I got guys down the hall who did art, and they were in the character animation department. When I say down the hall, I mean in our dorm room. And they built props and stuff, and we just jammed it all in my dorm room. And then we would take turns animating. And I was just learning animation, and we were shooting on a Bolex. There was no frame grabbing at all. Basically, we just shot it all on a Bolex, every shot one after the next, and then sent it all in for developing. When it was all done, and I think there was, there had to have been a bunch of shots. It must have been like 10 to 15 different shots in this thing that we did. I remember the film came back, and all of us got together, and we went in the experimental animation department's back room where they had a projector, and we put it up on the projector, and we start watching it. And of course, what we're really concerned about is, does it look good? But did we make any major mistakes, And so it ran, and just shot after shot looked pretty good. Now, one thing that the other guys didn't know was that every night when we'd finish the shoot, I would then turn all the lights back on and reshoot the shot as a safety, because I was a little worried that maybe the animation wasn't going to be so great. So I was shooting these safeties every time. Anyway, it gets to the end of the roll, and we're like 19, 8. I mean, I was 18 at that, we're young guys. We just went crazy. Like, yeah, we did it. We got all the shots. Now, it wasn't edited yet. It wasn't shot perfectly in sequence, but we had the shots, and we freaked out. And Jules Ingalls, who was the head of experimental animation, he bursts in like, "What's going on in here? Like, what are you troublemakers doing in here?" Because experimental animation usually don't have people cheering and going crazy. And then we showed him the footage, and he was like, "Oh," even though he's more in the experimental animation department, and what we had done was a little kind of story with characters and clay guys and stuff. He really appreciated it. He put a good word in the character animation department for me. And I ended up getting accepted in my second semester into the character animation department. So I just kind of got pulled into this world kind of right away. And I just liked making films, and I loved projecting and seeing people in the theater react to stuff, because that little short interstitial that we did, CalArt students altogether made 9 of them for this. It was like a worldwide contest, but we had done 9 of them. And we had a theater screening. There was a theater inside of CalArts called the Bijou Theater. It got packed out for the screening of all these interstitials, these MTV interstitials. When ours came up, the audience, when it was over, the audience just went crazy. Definitely was the audience favorite. It wasn't as maybe visually interesting and as experimental as some of the other pieces done, but it definitely was like a crowd pleaser. And that kind of put me on the map really young at CalArts amongst, the animators there. They kind of like, oh, this guy can kind of get something done. And it actually, he knows how to tell a little mini story, and it's properly exposed. I was like one of these guys that always had like a light meter on my belt, because that was like that was like the one thing I could always do. I was very comfortable with film at that point because I'd done photography in high school. That was kind of like my thing right away when I got into CalArts was, okay, he can kind of tell a story, and he can expose the film, and it looks good, and he can finish something. So I immediately kind of got pulled into this really cool group of animators and filmmakers in character animation. They kind of shepherded me, sort of these older guys, through this process of making films and talking about films. And it was just really a super fun time for me. It was very experimental, always shooting interesting things. And then I get to see what these other guys were doing, because sometimes they would say, I just get these people knocking on my dorm like, "Hey, Jamie, can you come check the exposure? We're doing like this backlight pass or whatever." And I, come out of my dorm room and go over, into the school and be in one of these big dark rooms with the giant Oxbury cameras. And film it was very romantic for me back in those days. So that was kind of, I guess, how I got started. Now, how I actually got
wait, you didn't say if you ended up, what happened with the contest with MTV? Did you end up placing, or?
I was a semi-finalist of some sort, good enough that they invited me to a big screening and party that they had at the New Art Theater. Mine was not one of the finishers, but another guy at CalArts, Eric Darnell, his won the whole contest. It was really fun. Like I think Thomas Dolby was one of the judges. He was one of the judges, and all the hip MTV people were there. There was this giant party afterwards in this tent, and I ran into all these people, young people who had submitted their work and were in the contest, that I would later in the industry run into, who became well-known directors. And it was kind of an interesting, weird little microcosm of what would become like the next sort of wave of people in the animation industry. By the way, all different styles. Mine was stop motion, but Eric did this. His whole piece was done with optical printing and 8mm footage of animals, and then he did this crazy thing of people saying MTV backwards, I believe, and then it was played forward, and so it sounded really weird. And so they were definitely leaning towards something more experimental. MTV, because his was the one that really finished. But I actually, being young and ridiculous, I went up and actually asked one of the judges at the party. I go, "Well, what about my film?" Like, what about? And it was really kind of cool, because the guy said, "Well, what you guys made was excellent, but we're kind of moving away from like the clay animation thing, and we're trying to look for more experimental stuff and something with more of an aesthetic." It was like kind of a trigger went off, like, "Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, I get it. That's what I need to do. I need to really kind of create my own aesthetic." And so it was really great, an amazing learning experience for me, thrust around all these, talented people right in my first semester of school.
Sounds crazy ambitious. I can't even imagine doing a project on top of schoolwork and then reanimating all the shots from that project on my own afterwards. That's plus like back in the day when you're doing things, I mean, film had to get developed. You had to use all the sophisticated tools and stuff. And now we just work on a computer, so it's much easier even.
Yeah. So there was a freedom to it. There was a freedom to not knowing exactly what you were doing. You kind of just set up the camera, and then your brain would kind of go into a different mode than it goes into today with the digital, because you kind of go into more of a meditative, like all your attention is glued to these moments and what frame you're on, and you've got an exposure sheet, hopefully, set next to you, and you're checking off boxes, and it's a much more of a high wire act,
Yeah. So did you finish the rest of your education taking animation courses then?
Yeah. So I stayed in animation. I focused mostly on the directing side of animation, story stuff, and also really got into cinematography and ended up shooting parts of my final project on 35, and I built a camera controller for that.
Well, it sounds like you have a real kind of originating passion for photography and cinematography from your experience. So I think it's interesting to know that now, because you had like a mix of all that experience and then animation, and then you went on to direct some shorts. So how did you end up after school? Like, where did that take you into the professional industry? How did you actually get in?
So that piece that I did for MTV, although I wasn't a finalist in it, I was put on some kind of short list of like, here's some young people that'll probably do something for cheap. Because the next year, my sophomore year at school, I was in a class, and my roommate, Dan Smith, he came up to the doorway and he had a sign in his hand that said HBO called. And like the first thought was, well, we don't even have TV in our room. Nobody really did at CalArts then. Apparently, our name was handed to them, and they needed little animated interstitials for a new comedy channel that they were starting. They ended up getting rid of it. But at the time, they were getting ready to launch this big comedy channel, and they needed some cheap, animations in between whatever they were showing. I didn't really feel confident that I could pull something off super professional by myself. So I got my friends together, many of whom had worked in the industry and done some cool short films, and we all submitted storyboards. We decided whoever storyboard they liked, then that person would be the director and everyone else would help them. So it happened to be that my storyboards, which I don't think were the best, but it was a kind of a funny little gag, they picked it. And so my first actual job was right at the beginning of my second year. So I was like 19 years old. I had to go get a bank account, and it was for HBO. And I think the gig was like $5,000, and it was a 10-second. I think it was 10 seconds. Maybe I'm trying to think it was 20 seconds, but I think it was just a 10-second little blip. And it was just a dumb little joke where you see this bartender. Wait, how'd it go? No, you see this kind of drunk guy at a bar, and he's talking to the bartender, and he says, "Hey, did I ever tell you the joke about the pig and the clown and the nun?" And the bartender's like, "Hey, man, shut up!" And the camera pans over, and there's a pig and a clown and a nun sitting at the bar next to them. So that was it. It was just this stupid little thing. The guys that ended up drawing the characters, Dave Wasson and Chris Miller and Mike Bell and Tom McGrath. I mean, those are all names. If you look up their, major guys in animation, they ended up doing an incredible job with it. And I just kind of helped shepherd it along as best as I could. We shot it on 16 millimeter and got it transferred and sent it off, and I got the paycheck, and everybody got their little, slice of the $5,000. So that was like my first gig.
Nice.
So then I ended up doing some ads for KCRW while I was still in school. I basically started kind of just putting my feet into the industry while I was a student. So that gave me a lot of confidence that I could pull something off by the time I got out. So there's a radio station called KCRW in LA, and they would pay for these like 1-minute advertisements on 35 millimeter that would show in movies, the art houses around LA. I had already done one of those ads for them while I was a student. And once I graduated, I thought, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask them if they'll fund another one of these things that I can do for them. And I'll buy a 35 millimeter camera, and I'll buy some gear, and we'll shoot it in my apartment in Hollywood. And I'll try to do something really interesting aesthetically that will kind of, this will be my entry into Hollywood. Like, everyone in town's going to see this thing on the big screen. And so it ended up being a really difficult project. Lots of multiple exposures in camera. It's very tricky. It was a lot of photo cutout work, a lot of like shooting live action, printing the photographs, cutting the photographs, hand tinting the photographs, putting the photographs back into 3D sets, doing camera moves. All my camera moves were like hand cranked moves.
Oh my gosh.
Again, multiple exposures. I mean, sometimes a shot would take 2 weeks, and then I'd make a mistake on the third exposure and have to start over again. Yeah, and then sometimes I'd think I got it right, and I'd get it back, and I'd look at it. I didn't have a Moviola myself, so I would screen it at the, like at Deluxe, I think was my lab. Maybe it was Technicolor. I think it was actually, now I'm thinking it's Technicolor. And, they would screen it for me, but sometimes these shots were so quick, they were just a lot of like 2-second shots, 1-second shots. It's a kind of a quick cut piece that I would kind of go, okay, well, did I get it? Did I not get it? And so then I would take the footage to this guy, Chris Cassidy, who he did a lot of Roto Effects, and he had a company called Roto Effects of America for years. And he had a little bungalow in Hollywood, sweetest guy. And he had all these roto stands, which are basically like, they're basically like an Oxbury down shooter that you can load film into, first project down, and then you would like draw out mats with like, pencils and then Sharpie on animation paper. And then when you were done, you would then take the shot footage out of the camera and the light that contraption that goes in that projects down through the lens, and then you put raw film in, and then it becomes a camera. And the idea is that everything is exactly lined up the way it came out, and now it's going in exactly through the same lens, and it'll land on the film, and you'd shoot on high contrast black and white, and that would give you a matte. That's how mattes were done in films. And so he had all these little stands there, and they had a Moviola. And a Moviola was a little upright weight, little machine to watch 35 millimeter footage. So I would go over there after I was done shooting and put my film in and watch it, and then go, oh, I didn't get it, and I got to reshoot, and I got another 2-week shot. So anyway, this took almost a year to complete this 1 minute piece, but it actually did the trick. It went into the
Did they give you a deadline of a year, or you just like?
No, I just kept going. But they were happy with what they were seeing when it was done. I mean, I think the thing played for 3 or 4 years.
Oh wow!
And people talked about it enough that I started getting calls from music video reps, and nice. I got a call from this guy, Dante Areola, who was doing graphic design for Cypress Hill's album packages, which were very stylized. And he asked if I would do a cover for a Cypress Hill album. And so I did that for him. And then the opportunity came up that he got to direct a music video. And he said, do you want to kind of co-direct this with me? And so he shot kind of his footage, and I shot my footage. I'm not really good at co-directing. So especially after years of being in animation at an art school where you're kind of just doing a lot of stuff by yourself. So I shot my stuff, which was live action and some experimental projection and whatever. And the editor, put it together, but mostly used my footage. And so kind of word went around town, like, oh, there's a new guy in music videos. And then next thing you know, just a few months later, I'm now directing another music video, and then another music video. So I had a string of music videos in the 90s, kind of. So that was the progression.
This was like your main income during that time? Like this was what you're doing full time?
Yeah. I mean, I should say that I was raised by artists, so I was never told like you got to go get a job. Like all I knew was gig culture. So to me, like that's what you do. You go from one gig and then you get the next gig. That's just how it works. So, for a while I was doing little animated title-y kind of things and experimental little promotions using animation. I also had a really cool opportunity, which was I worked for a while at Acme Filmworks when they were just starting. I think they were on their second commercial. And I came in as like a technical supervisor. I think they called me assistant director. I would, make sure all the exposures were right. I keep organizing the animation, and I work with another director who, wanted to just kind of freeform it. And then I would try to make sure that it all got, put together. And so that was kind of cool because that became a great kind of backup for me, because I'd be working on some project, and maybe if I was running low on cash, it would just always seem to work out. I get a call from Acme Filmworks like, hey, can you come in? We got this thing, or, we know somebody that needs an animation supervisor on a project. And so I at first it was awesome. One of the funny things about that was that my job security was based on film. I was good at dealing with the complications of film and making sure something's exposed correctly and making sure it's, everything's done right on film. I didn't realize in any way at that age that film was going to go away for animation. I didn't think that was going to happen. Didn't see that coming at all. And as it did start to go away, especially like in 2D, where it became much easier to deal with, the coloring and the creating the imagery out of the computer, even if it was scanned drawings, there was some work that definitely faded away for me. But I kind of segued into music videos, and that was live action stuff. So I wasn't really sure what I was doing. I was just kind of taking the gigs as they were coming.
It kind of sounds like your philosophy was, and you kind of mentioned this from some of your earliest gigs, you wanted them to kind of be your portfolio, I guess, but your philosophy was kind of find some opportunities and then just wow everybody, and then the work or the opportunities will come to you. Is that right?
Oh, sure. And when should you not have that attitude as a filmmaker, right? I mean, I think that every job is an opportunity to make something amazing. I think that the directors that continue to get more and more work are those people who take every opportunity. And that means that sometimes you have to say to an art director from an ad agency or whoever starts the project, you might have to say, look, I know you wanted this, but I think I could make this amazing. And, and sort of point in a direction where you can kind of hopefully put a little bit of your signature on it, whatever that is, and maybe tweak some things to make it a great little piece of filmmaking. And I just never underestimated the power of making something small and, refined and as good as it could be, as good as I could at least try to pull it off.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, well, you just kind of answered. I was going to ask you, what are some of those things that you can do to like push your aesthetic or,
I would say the number one thing, I don't know about aesthetic. That's hard for me. I mean, that's such a personal thing, but I will say this, the universal film language should not be ignored. That studying the very, very basics of filmmaking and the basics of storytelling and looking at great films and taking apart, take a movie you love and take a sequence that you think is amazing and just try to break it down. What's going on here? And I did so much of that when I was just very young and just trying to what is this filmmaking thing? And it was because the people around me were doing that. I was surrounded by all these really talented people that were always like, hey, Jamie, have you seen this film? You got to see this sequence, or you got to see this thing. And that's where we got our inspiration from, more than a class. And, it wasn't about, you didn't do a project to try to impress a teacher. You did a project to impress everyone around you, like the other students.
What kind of artists were your parents? I'm just wondering.
Well, my father was a musician, and he was a blues guy and rock and roll guy. And my mother was more of a kind of a fiber arts person. She could just make something out of anything. And so she would just kind of reach and be like, oh, I got some fabric. Oh, I think I'll, sew something out of it. Or she did so many different things. I don't even know where to start. But she did have this kind of magic ability to kind of create something out of nothing. It was really fun, to always watch her as a kid. Just she'd get an idea, and next thing you know, she's like a kind of a crazy scientist would, come up with some beautiful thing. And sometimes there'd be some duds. It was great to see that too. See some of her experiments and
nice. Yeah. It sounds like they had a big influence in rubbing off on what inspired you too.
Oh, of course.
So I'm wondering, you're living in Hollywood, you're doing all these music videos. Can you kind of give like the highlights of your directing career? Because I know like you're the founder of Dragonframe, and that's kind of, I guess, separate from the directing career. So I want to know how what you were doing in film led into that. So can you go over some of the highlights?
Well, some of my highlights, definitely that KCRW piece I just told you about, although there isn't a good version of it that anyone could find, but that was a piece that really meant a lot to me because it kind of put me on the map. And it also was stylistically very different. Then I did this video for a band called Morphine called Early to Bed. And it was kind of a fun story. It had like kids and this crazy puppet monster in it. And that got nominated for a Grammy for Best Video of the Year of '97, I think. And so that was kind of a highlight. I did a fairly famous music video for a band called Marcy Playground, and their song was called Sex and Candy. And that was like #1 for like 14 weeks or something on MTV back in the day.
Oh, nice. When you say I did a music video, for instance, like Early to Bed, which is a combination of like live action and like editing, what is your involvement in the directing? Are you doing the shooting? Are you editing too?
Oh, right. I'm sorry. Okay. I was directing. And so the music videos, the way that they were done, and pretty much done nowadays too, is that the band will reach out to certain directors through their management, and then the director will listen to the music and write up a treatment. And then the band will get the treatments from the different directors and pick one. And then at that point, as a director, you find a producer. You're basically making the thing happen. And
so the band is like, here's some money. We like your treatment. And I'm assuming a treatment is like a write-up of what's going to be.
It's just a written. Yeah, and nowadays I think they'd be more complicated with more visuals. I just did sort of written treatments. It would just be like 2 pages. You don't want to make it too exhausting.
Kids in a circus tent are trapped.
Yeah, exactly. Then you got to make it happen. So then maybe you're with a production company at that point that's supporting you, and so they're like, okay, here's some art directors that can build the sets, and then you pull the production together. Some of the music videos I did, I also was the director of photography. Some I didn't feel like I could do both jobs of directing and being the director of photography, but I was always on the camera. So maybe somebody else would help me set up the lights, and then I would get on the camera and then direct the band. And I always had another editor. I always felt it was good to have somebody else looking at it and seeing it with fresh eyes. And in fact, the morphine video that I was saying I liked so much, I didn't think I got the shots in the can. I didn't think I got them, and I was a little bit depressed after I was done shooting. And I drove up to Ojai, where my parents lived, and I kind of hid out for a couple of days. And then I got a call from them saying, hey, the editor's got the footage, they have the treatment, we've got a cut ready for you to look at. Come look at it. And I went to go see it, and it was actually like, oh, this could be something pretty good, but we need a little bit more footage. And at that point, we shot some more footage in LA because the shoot was in New York. So then we shot a few more things in LA to kind of fill it up, and it ended up turning out to be a cool little video. Did I answer your question, or did I?
Yeah, no, that was perfect. I mean, I wanted to know kind of what your involvement was in the actual production of the music video. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty much your baby. Music videos, they kind of just get handed to you, and if you're with a production company, they'll support you, and they're there to support your vision, but also to get it done on time and under budget, and you just try to work together to make it happen. Yeah.
So I'm just curious, because you ended up doing a bunch of music videos. Did you have like a little production company that you started to develop, or like people you always worked with, or is it kind of?
Well, I started at Duck Studios, and I was doing little commercials for them. I did like a Fruitopia commercial, which was like a Pepsi product. I did a bunch of stuff with them. So when I got my first music videos, they produced them, and they were trying to get a live action division started. It was called The Front, and we were basically just starting it up. But then I got kind of lured away by a company called MJZ, which was an amazing live action commercial company. And I did a couple of things with them. And then I kind of bounced around to some different companies at that point. I eventually ended up going back to Duck Studios to do the United Airlines spots years later.
Right. Yeah, I was going to ask you about those.
So the cool thing about the United Airlines spots, just as a little piece of animation history that's kind of important, is that Acme Filmworks, the place that I told you I worked at on their second commercial, the guy that ran that had a great idea, Ron Diamond. He thought, well, there's these beautiful films being made in animation, these short films. If I can find these like Academy Award-winning short filmmakers and convince them that they should direct commercials, we could use their amazing films, make a reel out of it. And that's kind of how he really got Acme Filmworks cooking. He got the eye of United Airlines, and they started doing these beautiful United Airlines spots. I don't know what year they started, but almost every one was directed by an Academy Award-winning short film animation director. And so he really started this really great line of commercials that got started. But then I think United Airlines was, bidding other animation companies, and they bid Duck Studios. But actually, let me just back that up a little bit. I got very lucky on that commercial. This is what actually happened. They wanted to go with this other director who bowed out, or he wasn't interested, or timing wasn't right. And then they said, okay, this guy's not going to do it. who else, what else out there is kind of turning our heads these days. And they had seen, when I say they, the ad agency for United Airlines, had seen my end title sequence on the end of Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events. Because they'd seen that, they said, well, let's figure out who did this. They got a hold of me on that, and maybe it was through Duck Studios, I don't remember, but that kind of pulled me back into stop motion. I hadn't done stop motion for years. The Lemony Snicket's was a After Effects piece. When we did the Dragon, I convinced them, hey, I know what you liked was After Effects, but I think we could do a version of this in-camera stop motion that would also be cool. I also really wanted to light things. The After Effects was always kind of a bit boring for me because I like physical objects to deal with. Did that answer your question?
So Lemony Snicket was boring.
No, it was difficult. It was all in the computer. I couldn't get my hands on things. I'm a very hands-on kind of artist. I was working with some other great director animators who worked on that piece, and they were much better at After Effects than I was. I really had to kind of fight my way through it, and through some pretty difficult stuff on that Lemony Snicket's for what After Effects could do at that time. So I just wanted to be free of being stuck inside the computer. I really wanted to bring everything out onto a stage and light it and get out paint and, make a mess of things,
So how did you actually end up getting the Lemony Snicket gig in the first place?
I like your wonder. How do you get these jobs? Well, I'll tell you.
Well, I'm super curious. That's like a...
Well, first of all, I want to just say, what's that old adage about luck is... preparation meets opportunity, and that is just so true because
sounds like your whole career almost.
Well, I think it's a lot of people's careers, and I really think you have to live by that motto, because how I got Lemony was that there was an editing company called MWP in LA, and they were the sweetest people, and they had come in to save the day on my KCRW spot and help me edit it. Because I was so burnt, kind of, and a little bit mental, honestly, by the end of that. I had basically been like a monk inside of my darkened Hollywood apartment for months on end and was kind of losing my mind. And they were like, okay, buddy, this is beautiful footage. We want to kind of attach ourselves to this a little bit and help you get it done. So they helped with the sound. They helped edit it. They actually edited it on an edit droid. So they transferred the footage with time code, put it into an edit droid, which was the first digital editing system. And actually, it didn't work off of hard drives. It actually worked off of a series of laser discs you load into it. It was developed by Lucasfilm. Then when that was all edited in video, then the sound could be done. But then the time code called key code, which tells you what actual frame on the film it is, then went back to the negative cutter. Anyway, they helped me do that. And they then edited a lot of my stuff over the years. And they really knew me pretty well. And there was a guy that came to them and said, hey, I have an opportunity to do a title sequence. It was a guy who had a graphic design company, and they were doing a lot of graphic design for the Lemony Snicket movie. And the director and producer of the movie said, hey, you've done all this beautiful design work. Do you want to do a title sequence? And they were thinking like, just kind of like wallpaper, like just keep it really simple. But then the people at MWP, Mike Miller in particular, said, oh no, you got to get Jamie on this, because Jamie's work is a little dark and it's a little, but also kind of like whimsical. Like, you got to get Jamie on this. So I was actually at that point in my career was thinking of getting out of film. This is like 2003, 2004, and going into architecture. So I was actually at that moment starting to take classes to get into an architecture school. And they kept bugging me about this Lemony Snicket thing. And so I finally said, okay, well, I want this much money, and it has to be done in Ojai, and you need to send people out here, and you got to rent a house. Anyway, I put up my demands, and they said, okay. So then we were in.
You didn't expect them to say yes, I guess.
I didn't think so.
Yeah. Architecture, that's totally the opposite.
No, it's very. There's a lot of people who do film and directors, and then have an interest in architecture. Because it's about creating an experience for someone. It's about creating entry points and exit points, and there's something very similar. And I've heard a lot of people who, and especially in animation, because animation tends to be very like controlled filmmaking, who then also have interest in architecture. Anyway, They put us up in a house rented here in Ojai, a big house. We had Todd Hemker on it and Benjamin Goldman were the other animators. I was directing and trying to do some of the sequences and storyboarding like crazy. And again, I just thought, I kind of go into this mode of like, let's make it great. Let's make it great. And I kept putting all these story elements into it. And I think the director of the movie wasn't so keen on the story elements, but once he kind of saw what we were doing and saw a story reel cut and some music, he's like, okay, that's cool. Go ahead. But then we were kind of just left to it. Like I would ask the director or the producer, can we get a soundtrack, maybe from Thomas Newman, who was doing the music? Could he just suggest a piece of music for us to cut to? And I asked that so many times, and finally I was like, look, just pick something. Leave us alone. We're in the end of this film. Like, they're dealing with their post-production and their mess, because by the time you're, trying to finish a film. And so what was crazy was I finished it. We brought all the files to eFilm, and they go to look at it like, this is 11 minutes long with the crawl. Like, this is longer than a whole 1,000-foot roll of film. Like, this is not cool, And so then we tried to like speed it up, and it didn't work. So the Lemony Snicket end title is one of the longest title sequences. I mean, maybe now because of digital, it doesn't matter, but it just was rare to have it go longer than a 1,000-foot roll of film, because that was what they'd have to, print it on. It just turned out the director loved it. Many of the people who reviewed the film would talk about the end titles. And so suddenly my name was on the map again. I had to really think, okay, am I doing this architecture thing? And then, like I just said, the United Airlines people, the ad agency was looking for someone to do something cool. And they saw that. You never know where the opportunities are going to come from. But if you really try to make everything exceptional and stand out, things will bubble up. It always has. And when I've done work that isn't that great, it's kind of mediocre, the phone doesn't ring. I've never got a call from someone saying, I heard you did this project. It's okay, but I heard it came in under budget and on time. So can I hire you? Never heard that.
Right. That's true words have never been spoken, I guess. My last question about your directing, The Little Prince. How did you end up getting involved in that?
Well, I knew Mark from the director of the movie for a long time. We weren't close friends, but we definitely knew each other. And because at CalArts, he was like also doing stop motion, and I was doing stop motion. So people would always go, "Oh, do you know Mark? He's doing stop motion." And by the way, the reason I'm saying it like this is because the CalArts had no stop motion program. So if you were doing stop motion, you were kind of like some weird satellite fringe person doing crazy stuff in your dorm room. In fact, I think he shot a lot of his film Greener in his apartment. So I knew him. And then when we both got out of school, we had some times where I think I borrowed some lights from him. And then there was a job he did where he borrowed my 35 system, and we were supporting each other. I mentioned that I did a little Fruitopia commercial. He actually worked on that with me while he was in between gigs. So we knew each other. Okay, so years down the line, he's done Kung Fu Panda. And I think we ran into each other. We were both in line to see Mobius speak at the CTN conference. And he said, yeah, I'm trying to decide if I'm going to do this film. This French company wants me to do The Little Prince. And at that point, I'd never heard of the book The Little Prince. I didn't know what he was talking about. And even when he described it to me, I didn't understand what it was. But we were just standing in line, and he was just telling me about it. And he was actually talking to me about like story conundrums he was having. And anyone knows me knows that I'd love to just give, whatever my 2 cents are about, story stuff. So anyway, then some time goes by. The job is actually kind of real for him. And at that point, I directed the Shins music video, A Rifle Spiral, which was a stop motion piece. I co-directed it with Alex Uhas, who did all the design on it, and he built the puppets, and he's an amazing artist. And I worked with him on a lot of projects over like a 10-year span. And he was just so fun to work with because he was so talented, first as an illustrator, and then he started getting into sculpting and was doing amazing sculpting work. And so it was at a point where he was getting into the sculpting that I said, hey, let's do like a proper stop motion, not like just a cutout thing. We'd done a couple of cutout things for the United Airlines. Let's do like some real characters. And so he got to sculpt some characters, and we did the Shins video. And, it wasn't like a huge hit. It wasn't like a viral sensation or anything, but amongst animators and stop motion people, they definitely kind of knew about it. And Mark had paid attention to it. Mark had gotten the idea to pitch the parts of the movie that were The Little Prince proper from the book. He pitched, why don't we do this in stop motion? And once that kind of got okayed, then he brought me out to Paris. It was kind of fun. I went out there and he showed me all the storyboards and everything that they were doing and said, do you want to bring your team to Montreal and do this section of the film, and you'll have your own building, and you guys will be, you'll have some freedom to kind of do your thing. Because one thing that I had developed over the years doing commercials was I like to work with a small, talented crew. And movies tend to get really, they tend to have to turn to more of a system. And I understand that need, but I wanted to approach the Little Prince the way that I approach the smaller project, which is you have a tight group of talented people and you try to do as much of that work between you as possible. So anyway, so he brought me out there and he showed it to me and convinced me to move out to Montreal. And then Alex Juhas came with me, and then we got Anthony Scott, who I'd worked with on the United States of Tara title sequence, which was something we had done and won the Emmy for best titles that year, best TV titles. That was a project for Steven Spielberg. I think, and then Anthony also worked on the Shins video. So me and Alex and Anthony were kind of like the core. We found our art director, Corinne Merrill, in Montreal, and she was amazing. And so the four of us became the heads of department. Yeah, so that's, Mark he knew me, and he knew me long enough to know me well enough to trust me with the project, I guess. And then he also had liked the recent work that I'd been doing with Alex and felt that it fit the vibe. Yeah, so you want me to back up and talk a little bit about Dragonframe? Or?
Yeah, yeah, let's switch gears a little bit. I'm wondering, maybe while you were doing all this, what was the point that made you say, like, you know what, I'm going to pursue building a software for stop motion specifically?
Okay, so I'll try to make this quick, but so I'm shooting stop motion while I'm in college, and I need a controller for the camera. And so I built a little box with the help from another teacher who knew electronics really well. And all the box did was fire off a stepper motor to go around once. And that would be my frame. And I had a potentiometer on it to adjust the speed of it. When I got out of school and I was, trying to just make it out there with my gear, I thought, okay, I got to hook this thing up to a computer. So we hooked the drivers that drive the motor to a computer, a little Apple II. And I started programming just something that would make the motor go around and give me easy ways to change like exposure times. And I brought the system home to Ojai, and my brother, Diami, who was probably like 14 or 15 at the time, he's a much better programmer than I was. He was really taking it seriously.
At 14 years old.
Oh, yeah, I think he had his first computer at 9, and he was writing apps for people in town to like take care of their addresses and like their mailing list and stuff at age like 12 or 13. So he really knew his stuff. And he just said, okay, hand this thing over to me. What do you want this thing to do? Could it keep track of exposures that go like forward and backwards, or like, could it, because I was doing all these in-camera stuff. And so he just starts layering in all these things for me. And he and I would work on this program on and off. And all that did was control my 35 camera to shoot. And then he added an element of it that could calculate simple camera moves in it for me. But those camera moves weren't going out to motors. The camera moves would put up data for me to move my hand crank motion control system to like the next number. I'd look on the screen, okay, I'm on this frame. Okay, I got to go to, 66.2 on this dial.
Oh my goodness.
We shot so many things that way. Actually, the first and second United Airlines commercial were done that way. There was no motion control on all those shots. It was all hand crank stuff. And we would actually hand it over to the animator to do. We'd generate the list of positions for them, and then they would hand crank the gear, the stuff.
So you were using this like Jimmy rigged system for about a decade, it seems, I guess.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Oh wow.
And I actually liked having less, like not having another computer like a Cooper running. Like I actually liked having less technology in the room during those days. It was manageable. And then there was some point in the late 90s, I think it was the Fruitopia commercial, that I asked Diami if he could make a Mac-based frame grabber. And back then, the Macs actually just had like a video in plug on the back. He made a, Mac-based frame grabber. Now, I will say, as far as frame grabbing goes, when I was doing those like KCRW ads and some of that early stuff, I had purchased a SVHS security deck Okay. And this was kind of a thing for a little while in the 90s. You would get this deck and you would set it up with a button that could shoot single field. So, video, it's this weird thing where like there's actually 60 fields, there's, 30 frames, but there's 60 fields. So when they would transfer 24 frame per second footage, it was actually 2 fields, 3 fields, 2 fields, 3 fields. We had a button that could shoot single fields because it was like security deck made to go really slow, right? Like taking a frame every second. And so we'd have this button, and while we're shooting, we'd also have to remember, okay, shoot the film. Okay, now go over and click, with the video thing. And you couldn't watch it as you were going, but when you were done, you'd have to shoot a bunch of frames at the end so that it would actually play through. And then you'd watch it and see if you'd messed up. So you could at least see if you had to redo the shot without waiting for dailies to come back. But then Diami made this Mac-based frame grabber, and so there was a couple projects that we set the camera next, like a video camera, next to the film camera. Now, somewhere around that time, I think is when the Lunchbox also came out. And then I moved I wasn't doing a lot of stop motion. So the whole Lunchbox phase, I kind of missed that. There was an era in the late 90s, again, where I moved on to more live action music videos. I wasn't really aware of the Lunchbox.
So what was the point where you were like, okay, I have this system set up. I got my brother helping me. I'm working on some commercials. Now I want to actually take it to the next step and create what is now the best in class stop motion software out there.
Okay, so the reason that Dragonframe is called Dragon is because the United Airlines Dragon commercial, I had a choice to make. I thought I'd shoot on film like I always had, but I also own this little Leica Digilux 2 point and shoot camera that has beautiful lens on it. And it was a digital camera. And I was using that to shoot elements for my After Effects projects. I would shoot an element on that, and it was kind of like a cheap way to scan kind of cool stuff in. And so I shot some tests with it. I thought, this image is great. It's even got a little bit of kind of noise in it in the low end, which kind of resembles film grain. It also had a video out. So I told my brother, I said, this thing's got video. So we have a live view. It was like 320 by 180. It was like half normal video size, just nothing. And so we combined sort of the ideas of all the controls that we had on the camera controller and his Mac-based frame grabber and kind of put those ideas together for the first time. So we were building sets and building characters and designing and shooting test set stills. Meanwhile, Diami's in San Diego writing code so that we have a way to shoot the thing. And so
did you hire him, or he's just doing this in his spare time, or what?
I think we put it in the budget, and it wasn't, It wasn't a lot of money. I think we put it in our budget, a little tech budget, and we paid him a little bit, and he made a thing. I think we called it the Caliri Motion Machine or something like that. I don't know, whatever it was called, but it was just some, it wasn't pretty. I remember at that point, the Mac UI had all those like gooey gel buttons and stuff. They were kind of 3D looking. I don't know if you remember that, but there was like kind of a weird UI kind of look that they had.
Yeah.
It was not pretty. It was just a bunch of buttons, but it did some cool things. And you could bring in a lineup layer. So we had to do that for some of our effects. And the resolution was, I can't believe how smooth the animation is on that piece, considering how low resolution that thing is. We worked with this animator, Kim Blanchett, and that was the first time I had really worked with a professional stop motion animator who had done really high level character, complex stuff. And he was a total character, really fun, thick Boston accent. And he really kind of told us what was important. He was the one that sort of explained, like, no, none of the animators use onion skin. It's really about stepping to live. And he just kind of like laid out what he needed and everything that he thought he needed. And as he would come up with ideas for what he could use, we would implement them. And then I had what I needed as a cinematographer and director. So we shot that whole commercial on this Leica point and shoot camera. And it ended up winning all these awards and stuff. It's kind of funny. It was just shot on the dinkiest camera. But that was like the first incarnation of that. And then I was using the program on a commercial in LA for kind of like Pier 1 kind of store, but that's not what it was. I can't remember what it was now. But we were moving all these objects around. And the animator was Tennessee Norton Reed. And I was the animation supervisor on it. And I had my equipment. And they were shooting on film, but we were using my little program from the video tap off the camera. And Tennessee said to me, this program is great. There's nothing really out there for professionals. And there's going to be a new Nikon camera coming out that has live view integrated in it. And I think you guys should seriously consider like making a company and selling this. Before that, I don't know if it occurred to me to really do that. I don't know if we really thought there was a market for it. But so we decided to do it. And my brother and I, we had seen my parents do some make some attempts at small businesses that had failed pretty epically, and so we were very cautious. I would say cautiously optimistic, but I don't even know how optimistic we were. We were just cautious. So Diami would do his programming after his day job, and I was designing the program in Photoshop. I was feeding him these buttons and screenshots, and then we talk about it and how it's going to work. And I think the first version of Dragonframe 1 had the animation workspace, and I think it had a cinematography workspace, but it was very limited. You would just shoot some test shots there, I think, and it would give you like a histogram. It was very simple. If there was audio, it was very simple. You just loaded in, a track. There must have been audio because it was used professionally. So there must have been audio, but it was pretty simple. We were working on it through our second United Airlines spot, which was called Heart. So that was cool because everybody was pushing on it. We had more animators. Everyone's trying it, finding bugs in it. And
you're sharing it with all your animator friends then?
No, just on my jobs.
Oh, okay, I see.
Again, we did this crazy thing where we rented a big house in Ojai. This was a 3-story kind of McMansion in the hills. And people lived there and then would wake up and then start filming. It was a little bit like a bad real world show or something. It got a little crazy. But we had, different rooms, different shots going on. And so animators would, give feedback, and I would see how I was working with the cameras. And we then, before we released version 1, we also added Canon support. And I think it went live in March 2008. We had the website going. One of the first companies to use it was Cup of Coffee. So aren't they Toronto?
Well, they were. Unfortunately, they're not here anymore. But that would have been prime time for a cup of coffee, 2008.
Yeah. So, right. So they started using it. They really pushed on it hard. They were shooting all these TV shows, and so I actually flew out to meet them and kind of talk to the animators and get a kind of on the ground reports from them how it was working. And luckily, because I understand animation and I understand the process, when I go to talk to an animation team, I understand what's going on. Or I talk to a camera team, it's not an abstract, problems that they're telling me about. So so that's when it got started. And then it just, word got out. We didn't put any money into advertising. We didn't spend anything except our own effort. And then it just slowly started to, we got a sale today. We got a sale on Wednesday.
Oh, nice.
Oh my gosh, we're selling one every day. Oh, now we're selling 2 every day. Like it just started to snowball as word went out. And then I think the big jump for us was to convince the feature films to use it. And 3 Mill Studio with Disney was doing Frankenweenie. Some of the people on Frankenweenie had come off of Coraline. Now I didn't mention it, but I also worked on Coraline as an art director for a little while. At the end of Coraline, we were sending them beta versions of Dragonframe to use on their test stations. And some of the guys had used it on their test stations and saw how quickly it shot, saw how much better it was from their in-house. Their in-house system was a little bit slow and a little complicated. And so those guys went on to Frankenweenie and they said, well, what about this Dragonframe? Can we try it? So they started testing it. And then I flew out to meet them in the UK and showed them that we were adding DMX support, lighting support. And that was great because they were trying to solve that. I actually was in the room and I showed them the DMX box and they pointed to the back corner and said, look at that mess. And it was like this DMX board and some crazy, electronics projects going on. And they were trying to work out how are we going to, automate all of our DMX lighting. And so I kind of showed up with the right piece of gear at the right time. They really stuck with us. They had a problem. They had a couple of small problems with some of the lip sync starting to shift a little bit. And my brother actually flew out there as soon as they had the problem and sat in the studios in a corner, like until the problem got fixed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Has it really just been you and your brother working on Dragonframe this whole time?
As far as building the program, yes. And it's definitely been a massive effort. Like I have to take, like a year off on a redesign, like to go from 4 to 5 or, from 3 to 4 to do all the graphic design. And it, it takes up all my brother's time. It's a huge program at this point with the motion control. And I mean, it's pretty vast, but we've had other people come in to do electronic stuff. We're not electronic engineers. So to build the DMX box, Steve Sweetie did that. And we had DMC 16 and DMC Plus, like the motion control interfaces.
So you were just saying about the DMX boxes, but I'm wondering, can you go over the main components of Dragonframe for somebody who's maybe not so familiar with working with it?
The main workspaces, and so there's an animation workspace, and some people may get the program and only kind of live in the animation workspace. That space has got a lot of tricks in it. It's got a lot of ways to blow up the image and look at tight sections. It's got a lot of tools to draw, layers of increments if you wanted to. It's it's basically the area for the animator to refine their animation as they're going. They can bring in other shots. Maybe they have to have some interplay with a shot on green screen that's from some other element. They can bring those in and take out the green screen. It's not a compositing program, but we can pull a mat so you can see an interaction between two characters shot in two different places. There's a lot of different things in that space for trying to sculpt out a performance. Then you've got audio, which is critical if you've got any lip sync. So there's a lot of tools in there to either kind of write out phonetics if that's the way you want to work. Some people just drop in the audio and just listen to it as they go, and they kind of sculpt a mouth shape as they go. But normally you'd want to plan that out a little bit before, so you're not having to think about mouth shapes as you're also dealing with everything else. And so you could have a bunch of characters with different lines readings loaded into that audio workspace, and you can also use, if you've done 3D printing, you've got 3D printed mouths, you can load those in as Photoshop layers, and you can play them back to see what that's going to look like. And then we have the Cinematography Workspaces, which is just a place to check that the photography is actually looking right. And you would normally be in there first. So you normally start in the Cinematography Workspace to just, is the aperture right? Is the shot looking good? And you can control the camera from that space. You don't have to go over to the camera. So you have full control. And all those controls of all the bazillion cameras, those all have to be taken care of one at a time by Diami. And he's established quite an amazing camera control library that actually other people rent from us because it's so well put together. And then
also sounds like a nightmare to track.
Yeah, it's such a nightmare to track. And it was harder at the beginning. Like we really had a hard time. I remember Nikon was like a kind of a spaghetti mess to deal with their SDKs, their controls. Like each camera would be different. They weren't using the same kind of protocols all the time. And maybe they've sorted that out by now. Yeah, so that's actually been one of the toughest things about the program is just making sure it's compatible with as many cameras, And there's always somebody still who's like, but I've got this weird camera and I'm the only person in the world with it. And why doesn't it work?
Get a different one.
All the time. Like, well, we got this Olympus, and it's kind of old, but it still works. Like, you know what? We can't like stop what we're doing for one camera. But we do try to do as many as we can. Mm-hmm. And then we have DMX lighting. So I think we now have 512 separate controllable channels of DMX lighting controls, and a lot of that's moving over to LED dimmables and stuff, which is kind of cool. But it's pretty advanced interface in there for doing that stuff. And then we have motion control. So that's kind of a gigantic section of the program because motion control alone, I mean, if you were just going to buy an off-the-shelf version of our motion control software, it would not be $300. Motion control software is pretty expensive, but we just throw it in there because, I'm a big believer in everybody having the most professional tool in their toolbox, even if they might not be ready for it. I want to give my kid a real guitar, not a plastic one. The people who are buying Dragonframe are taking whatever they're doing seriously. They're going to, spend $300. That means that this isn't just a little weekend project. This means that they're building sets that are probably going to cost them more money than they really know when they started, and they're going to build characters that are going to cost them. They're going to be well into thousands of dollars by the time they're done with their film, and so they take it seriously enough to buy the software. So we want to give that person the full suite. Other people have told us, oh, you should sell like a lot of different versions of your program at different price points. But one thing I loved about film was that I had a 35 millimeter motion picture camera. It was a Arri 2C. And what I thought was so amazing about it was that during those film years, the technology kept getting better and better, but the technology was in the film stock. So I'd have my camera, the new film stock is made by Kodak or whoever, I could put that in my camera and I'm shooting the same film stock that they're shooting Terminator 2 on or whatever. And I loved that accessibility to the professional level. That to me was one thing I loved about film is that, I mean, now with the digital, it's like, oh, you know, who can afford these really expensive cameras? But anyway, so I try to keep Dragonframe somewhat affordable, but also completely the same product. If you're got Dragonframe, you have the same thing that they're shooting Kubo and the 2 strings with. You have the same thing that they're shooting the Little Prince with. That, you know, it's the same piece of software on that computer.
Well, yeah, and I know, like, I used it for the first time last summer, and it seriously upped my game in terms of creating something that looked very professional immediately, just opening up and using it connected to a camera. It's very powerful. And I'm wondering, you know, there's all these components. You've got, I don't even know how many features. Are there some kind of more interesting features that not a lot of people know about that you find are really useful or whatnot?
Well, you know, there are things. I mean, I think you took advantage of the Increment Editor. Is that right?
Yeah, I loved that. That was a lifesaver when figuring out like jumping and like how far something is going to shoot and stuff.
Yeah, that's one that I often find that people don't know about. You know, they don't know about that.
I just discovered it randomly. I was just playing around.
Just like clicking on things. There's a whole, if you have the right camera, there's a whole section in the kind of layer guides in animation workspace. If you click on the camera, down below there's a couple more little tabs, and one of them is the live view magnification tool, which can kind of blow up sections of the footage.
Oh my gosh, I wish I had known about that before, because I was in the actual camera viewfinder. I was clicking the magnifying glass to see if I was lining stuff up.
Oh, no. Yeah, it'll like position it for you. And I think you can have actually up to 8 different places in the frame now, I think, that you can blow up. And what you do is the 3 key, which is the go to live, you double tap it. It takes you from the widescreen and then to like the first like A composition, and then the B composition, and the C, and like however many of those you have set up, you just keep double tapping it. And when you double tap to the new one and you're blown up, then everything works. You know, all of your like your, you know, flipping through the frames. Now you have a bunch of frames just on that close up. So
man, I wish we had this chat before.
Well,
it just saved me so much time and headache.
One thing everybody should do as Dragonframe is just go to the tutorials on our website, and they're not very long. Just sit there and just make your way through all of them, because we try to touch on all
I'm someone who has to click around to learn, so I need to go to those tutorials.
Yeah, even if you go to the tutorial, just so you know, oh, I know that thing is there. There's a kind of a cool feature where you can bring in footage that is from a previous shot if you want to know how it's going to cut, and you can bring that footage and line it up before frame 1, so like 0 frame and before. And so that way, when you hit playback and you're playing through your frames, it'll play through the last shot and then into the cut and into your next shot. And that's kind of a cool thing.
That would have helped me too, because I was literally loading in the frames to the scene from the scene before to figure that out. So I really need to go into those tutorials, it sounds like. I just jumped in. I got a little briefing from someone at the school who had some experience with it, and I was like, all right, I know enough now. I'm just going to start shooting. And that's what I did.
Well, one way to think about it is, if you're running into the problem, chances are others have, and we may have tried to fix it. You know, we may have tried to accommodate for whatever that is, like how do we cut into a shot, you know, things like that. We may have, and so, you know, even writing into support, if you're not sure, if you can't find something, do you have a way to do this? We'll write you back, you know.
Well, you guys are really responsive.
Yeah, so Diami and I we create the software, but we have other people to do support. And if they don't understand the question, then it gets sent to us. So support and shipping is done, you know, we're not, you know, putting keypads in boxes.
Right. So can you give me a little bit behind the scenes of what Dragonframe is like now? Like you mentioned, you know, you've got people working to create the software and put stuff in box and shipping and support, and there's you and your brother. Like, give me a little bit behind the scenes of how things are running these days versus like when you were starting up and, you know, just creating it, which we got the whole behind the scenes there.
Well, I'd have to say the biggest difference between the beginning and now is that now that we're kind of known as like the industry, you know, standard, at first we were just kind of fighting for our lives to like, you know, oh my gosh, we got to add this feature or no one's going to use it, or we better add this, or, you know, we're going to lose traction. And so there was a lot of, we really ramped up our putting in features at the beginning. In the first few years was quite a race to try to, you know, just get the software going. There was a lot of anxiety about competition and what things we were going to have or not have. Now that the program has gotten pretty fat, now it's more about refinement. And so it's not as stressful, I have to say. So there's things that I'm asking for to put in that I'll come up with an idea and then I'll pitch it to Diami. And, you know, I might be the only person in the world that's really wants this thing in it. And so it's not like do or die, but it might be like, oh, that's a good idea. Let's get to that at some point. Now, we do have studios who say, oh, we'd really like this, we would like this. And we get these lists from the studios and from animators working on short films. And we're always putting those lists together and kind of putting them in a hierarchy. Like, okay, which one of these, you know, what of these are very idiosyncratic? So the funny thing that we've learned about studio culture is that, you know, you have a couple of key animators that say, you got to do this thing this way. And then everybody will go, okay, we got to do it that way. And then you'll go to another studio and there'll be a few people that say, you got to do it this other way. And so you have one whole studio filled with people saying, you've got to do this. And then you've got another whole studio going, that you could never animate a movie like that. You got to do this other way. And so, so these kind of little, so you have to decide, like, is this just an idiosyncratic kind of mini culture where everyone's kind of obsessing over this thing that they need? Or is this something that every person that buys the software could use? And so that process of making those decisions is kind of a constant. We also have things that go on the back burner and then, you know, eventually get done. Like, I really wanted to have this iPad app that you could look on the iPad, see what's through the camera, and then you connect these game controllers on the side of the iPads called Game Vice, and they would actually drive the motion control around. And so you could look through the iPad app, drive the controller, see what's through the lens, check focus, set keyframes, jog motors, basically do all this stuff that controls, you're basically remote controlling the motion control workspace. And that I'd put on the table years ago, and it just seemed like too much of a headache. But just recently, my brother was like, hey, let's do this thing. So I started designing. I mean, we had a working version so quickly, and we had to work out the bugs and stuff. But, you know, we just kind of jumped on it. And I've got a motion control rig here, and it's called Arc Pilot, and it's already being, you know, used on some real productions right now up in Portland. So,
nice.
You know, so sometimes, you know, but see, that's the kind of thing where it's fun and it's really kind of a nifty thing that works well if you're trying to program camera moves. But, you know, 99% of our users are not going to need that app, you know.
But who knows if that, because one of the things that stop motion is, it's not exactly limited to, but it's still frame shots because it's so hard to do like nice camera movements with a stop motion shot. So maybe that'll change. Maybe creating this is going to change how people approach situations. I don't know. But well, it also sounds like you're Go ahead. I was going to say, it sounds like you're very intertwined with what's going on in the industry to make sure that Dragonframe is constantly evolving to meet what people want out of it, which I think is amazing and really hard to do as a, you know, to be that agile as a software company.
Yeah. And that's why having it just be my brother and I is good for quickly, you know, making decisions. And, you know, I went up to Leica and met with them, and one of the things that they asked for was having more of these close-up windows. And the reason was because, you know, they're shooting 4K. The screens now, it used to be you shoot on film and projection was shaky. Like if you in the old days had a locked off 35 millimeter shot and you projected it across a huge movie theater, if you went up and put your finger on the edge of a table or something, you'd see that it was moving all around. You know, like the frame would actually kind of jiggle. Do you get what I'm saying with my example?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
But digital projection is just there. I almost describe it as like a wall, where film projection is more like a window, because it would kind of move around, and it was like a little bit like your mind had to kind of grab a hold of it. The digital projection is just so solid and so high resolution that the animators, they cannot fake anything. They've got to, they got to move the eyes, they got to be just perfect. And so they're now really using a lot of these close-up, what we call live view magnification windows. And I went up there maybe a year and a half ago, and they said, can you only give us 4, can you give us, more, or whatever it was, or maybe we only did 2, whatever it was, we weren't giving them enough. And at first I was really kind of like, is this one of those weird idiosyncratic things? But they're like, no, Jamie, let's look at what we have to do. And we have a character way out in the background, and we got to make it perfect. And, that was something that we kind of jumped on right away. And that's not something I would have thought of at all. I would not have thought of that was a thing. But the animators' needs have always been something I have to really open up my ears to. I'm more on the camera side and the cinematography and the lighting and the motion control. That's my focus. So when the animators talk, I have to kind of tune into kind of seeing it through their eyes.
Gotcha. I'm wondering, you mentioned, studios use it and whatnot. Are there kind of segments of different users that use Dragonframe? Studios on the one hand, and then, independent animators on the other hand. Are there other segments that I'm not thinking of that might use this?
Yeah, there are people who use it for experimental things. There's some people that use it just for photography, like instead of like a capture one, kind of a thing. But I would say independent animators, whether that's someone in school or that's like a small team that's decided to make a film, I think that's probably most of our sales are just a couple people or one person says, I'm going to make something. Or small studios, like kind of like animation teams. I think that's kind of our biggest market. It has to be someone who's really taking it seriously, I guess, because there are so many, inexpensive, if not free options to shoot stop motion.
Gotcha. So you must also have a good idea of, how many people are kind of shooting stop motion professionally around the world, I guess, because if you're going to, there are other competitors out there, but you're kind of the main software. So do you have an idea of how many animators in stop motion there are kind of in the world?
I don't know. The one thing I don't know is I don't know how many people like buy the software on a whim. Like, I don't know if someone's like, yeah, stop motion, I got money.
Probably a few.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
They invest and then realize what it takes, and then they never touch it again.
I don't know if we get a lot of those. I hope we don't. I'd hope that the people who are doing it are serious. But I would say there's definitely more stop motion now in the world than there's ever been. Stop motion, when I was doing it in college, was like, you were just like a weirdo. Like, what are you going to do? You mean like Gumby? Like what? There was a stop motion contingency out there, but it was in the live action movie effects. So there was a lot of people in Hollywood that knew how to do stop motion, but that was because they had to, make a tauntaun move or whatever, they had to do that kind of stuff. And so when that died away to CG, there was a whole kind of segment that fell away, and those guys either stopped working or they had to learn how to do CG. And then there was kind of like some fringe, like commercial people that did stop motion. There was like the Pillsbury Doughboy commercials. There were like certain sets of commercials that were like, oh, there's one guy that does those. And then MTV, that opened up. There was a little bit more, but there wasn't that much going on. There was more experimental film work probably in Europe that was stop motion. You had the guy that did the California Raisins. Who's that? Yeah, you had the Will Vinton studio. But that was it, like in America, as far as a studio that was dedicated to stop motion. That was it. You had the Kyoto brothers, but they did a little bit of everything, and they did like feature effects stuff.
Right. Yeah.
But now it's kind of massive. You just see it by looking online at how many short films are being made and how many commercials and music videos. It's just everywhere. And then the feature films.
People are gobbling it up because it's like animation's everywhere nowadays, and it's like a unique form. Do you have an idea? Like, could you estimate how many, like, what the industry is like right now? Is it comparatively?
I'll just say that there's I'm not going to give an exact number, but there's definitely tens of thousands of users out there that are using Dragonframe.
That's encouraging for me to hear, because when I left high school back in 2000 and whatever, 6 or 7, Like there was like nothing going except for a cup of coffee, really. There was not that much going on in stop motion. And so I didn't see it on TV. I didn't see it in movies. So I just didn't pursue it, even though that was what I did every single night after school. So I'm glad that there are tens of thousands of people around the world using it now. That's encouraging to hear.
Oh yeah. And I've seen lately a few ads. I don't know if it was on Instagram or where, but I've definitely seen ads for companies saying we need stop motion animators. There's
I saw
a bunch of
Stupid
features
Buddies posting around.
Yeah. So there's there's a bunch of features going on in Portland right now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like, sucking all the animation talent up there. And so there's actually a need now. So
you're kind of like at the forefront of, and in terms of stop motion, the art form and the technology, and the technology has already been kind of like a game changer for the format. Do you have a sense of what the next kind of thing is going to be game changer for stop motion? Or are we kind of hitting the peak of like talent and technology and the art form itself?
Well, I don't think I know what will happen in the future. I didn't see film going away. I can't say that I know what's going to happen. I will say that it looks like LED lighting is going to kind of take over, as it becomes more affordable.
We just got some of those at our school in the studio. Everything was those very hot studio lights before.
Right. It's so much nicer when you're not melting. In the old days, if you were shooting, like if you had to be at F-16 and you were shooting on some, 200 speed stock, whatever, you're just like on fire in there.
Oh yeah, I actually got a sunburn from being so close to them in the studio on my face. My nose is peeling. Yeah.
So I think the LED lighting will be a change. The thing that is a question mark for me is, will the photography angle ever change? So, will there be some thing that someone uses a camera that's got, 10 little lenses on it that then calculates focus or like, does it become synthesized? Does this photography become synthesized? I hope it doesn't, because I really like the simplicity of, lighting through a lens and picking a lens and all of that. And also, if you make some system that gives you 20 options when you're done, it's going to detract from
well, it's kind of like that in CG already. In CG world, when you're setting up shots within a computer, you have all these like options to choose from. But from my understanding, the people that really exceed in those roles, or at least the people that I've talked to, also have a strong photography and real life background, because you're trying to mimic that art form from real life.
Yeah, I think that I did a bunch of still life stuff that kind of helped me do that, but then I did a lot of portrait photography. But I will say that most of the people in the animation world, even in the bigger picture of CG or 2D or whatever, they don't just look at animation. Most of what they'll look at are brilliant live action films for framing, for timing, for ideas that maybe would have been easier to try to pull off in a live action scenario. Like, let's just shoot this way. That you can't just go, let me just shoot this 10-second stop motion shot that's going to take 3 weeks this way. Most of the time when people are in this business, the successful people are talking about studying a sequence or look at what this director did. They're mostly talking about live action stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense. Are you still directing yourself these days?
There's a little piece that I need to finish up that I started a couple of years ago with Haley Morris that I DP'd and we're kind of co-directing. But no, right now I'm just kind of chilling with my family, and actually I'm kind of gearing up for Dragonframe 5 to start to work on that.
I guess you're also being forced to chill with your family right now.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I don't know where my directing is going to go at this point. I'm going to have to start doing something, but I'm not sure what that's going to be.
Well, it sounds like you're in a nice place right now, though. So I'm just wondering, to wrap it up, maybe one more question. So, thinking back on kind of your career or just your journey, you started off in film and then saw some opportunity and were given opportunities in animation and saw that through, and then software, et cetera. So, for somebody who's knows they want to get into the industry or stop motion specifically, and you've had success as a director and a developer and a business owner, et cetera. What is your advice to them if they're unsure of the exact path they should take, but they just want to get into it? Kind of like how you started, I guess.
Well, I guess it depends on what you want to do. If somebody wants to be a stop motion animator, then they have got to do a lot of stop motion animating, and they've got to get some serious mentors in that area, and they've got to take it seriously, and they've got to compare their work to the really good stuff. And that's just like playing an instrument. You just got to do it. You got to practice. You got to get on it. That was never my thing. I was more of a director, and so I wanted to be really in control of the visuals. So I poured my technical interest into understanding everything I could about modern cinematography. So, if you've got an area that already piques your interest, just try to do it. So I shot a lot of stuff in college and as I got out of school, just shooting constantly. And so you have to practice and you got to study. And then if you want to direct, or maybe even on the DP side of things, you really need to just study filmmaking. And you're going to have an advantage over anybody who thinks, well, there's no rules. Rules are made to be broken. Okay, they are, but sometimes you got to tell a story. And I personally have benefited from telling very simple stories. That's and sometimes I'll even purposely slow things down because that's the way I like to go. Really trying to know your filmmaking that's gonna help you no matter what you do. So if you're an animator and you're on a shot and maybe the director is green and they're telling you to do this thing and you go, well, wait, is that going to cut? You're coming from the wrong angle, or are you sure this is what you want? Do you want me to start 20 frames earlier before the ball bounces? So you have a little area to move the edit. If you know the process of making a film and you understand the problems that can happen in editing, you are going to be helping out in whatever position you're in, because you're going to spot potential problems and you're going to make the product better. So, one thing I would say to someone who's new is I've really taken a lot of advantage of frame rate. To me, frame rate is kind of a malleable thing, like the frame rate that you shoot at and that you also project at. Like the Shins video, I think we did the entire Shins video at 15 frames per second. So knowing that YouTube and whatnot you don't have to make it 30, you don't have to make it 29.97. You could make it whatever and it'll play that video. So we did that at 15 frames per second. We did everything at that. I even did the camera. It was made a little bumpy, but I knew that would work, and it saved us a lot of frames of shooting. It saved us also frames of having to do twos. So we didn't do like 24 on twos or 30 on twos. I just said, no, I'm setting everything to 15 frames. You're not going to have to worry about going click each time. Yeah. And then we set up our editing at 15 frames. I think maybe if it was going to be broadcast, it would just be a button switch to export one at 29.97. It wouldn't be a big deal at all. But I've definitely, played with that. The little prints, 12 frames per second for all the animation, camera moves on ones, knowing that you could get away with 12 frames per second and that it would add a sense of feeling the animation. Yeah. And it actually makes it easier. When you go to ones, you have the possibility of making it smoother, but you also have the possibility of making it jerkier. Because you have these single frames that could go, get really raggedy on you. 12s is more forgiving. So when we set up to do the little prints, I said, no, we're just going to animate on twos. Now that we had to do actually on twos, shoot 2 frames because we had camera moves on ones. But understand frame rate. Shoot some things, at 8 frames a second. Shoot something at 12. Shoot something at 15. Because you might get a client. All they need is this little thing. From beginning to end, you're going to shoot the whole project. You have control. Maybe they say, well, our deliverable is 29.97. Okay, well, you shoot it at 15. It looks great. Then you put in After Effects, and then you kick out a 29.97 and give it to them.
Makes sense, yeah. I mean, that's something that I didn't really think of firsthand, but yeah, it's good to be agile with frame rate when it comes to what you're doing in the project. So, yeah. Is there anything else you'd like? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, is there anything else you'd like to share?
I'm very grateful for all the stuff that I've gotten to do, and getting to make Dragonframe is a lot of fun for us, and we take it very seriously. And I just hope everybody enjoys it.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for coming on the chat, Jamie. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you and hear the wonderful story of how Dragonframe came to be, and also your directing career.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Of course. And if you're listening and you'd like to follow Jamie's work, you can check out his Vimeo page, which I'm going to include in the link of this podcast description. And if you're interested in Dragonframe, of course, you can go to dragonframe.com and check all that out. And thank you so much for listening. And that's all for now. Okay, bye.